Okay.
And we're just waiting for Klaus. Here comes Klaus now. So we're all on.
Okay.
Hi, Prof. Okay.
Hello. Hang on. Hang on. Let me see. There you go. Hello.
Hello.
Cornfield, how are you doing? Oh.
So Klaus, I've got to start off by asking you a very German question. Did you see that article yesterday that 9 out of 10 Germans that have been invited for the AstraZeneca vaccine are not turning up for their appointments?
It's unbelievable. Yes, I heard that. I heard it actually from a different source in Germany yesterday, and I think there's the damage that has been done through the Handelsblatt, which is it's like the Economist in Germany, when they suggested that anyone after age 65 was essentially not protected, has done huge damage. I think that's just really stuck, particularly in a population that is generally, and when you look at the statistics, much more hesitant when it comes to vaccination than the UK or other places. I mean, we're kind of, Germany is, I think, is kind of in the midfield, about 50% or so. There are worse ones, but certainly the UK is much better than that. Yes, I mean, it's a tragedy. I think they've done so well in the earlier phase of COVID with all the measures they put in place. But now I think with vaccination, they really have to make a big effort to improve on that.
So I mean, did you see the Scottish results on the BBC News last night they spoke about?
Yes, yeah. I mean, it looks fantastic.
Yeah.
You know?
So it looks like, it actually looked like the efficacy of the AstraZeneca vaccine, the Oxford, was actually better than the Pfizer vaccine in the Scottish elderly population.
Yes.
Which is something I hope the countries that have actually not recommended it for older people realize, because the Oxford AstraZeneca vaccine is going to be the game changer because it doesn't need a cold chain,
especially for developing countries.
Yes, yeah, totally. Yes, I think it's really important to stress the point that whilst there's studies to get these drugs or these vaccines licensed, there's a lot of ongoing collection of evidence that strengthens or weakens the results. Unfortunately, it's so far all been underpinning the efficacy, broadly speaking, and I think that's another important point, that whilst they have a license, they are not being that's not everything. It's building up also from the Israeli data. I mean, they are a huge nationwide lab at the moment, almost, right? Because everybody's registered for the vaccine and their response, and they're doing really well.
Jolo, there's a question for you. So Jolo Matthews is our neuroscience pharmacist at Barts-MS, and one of the questions that came out is that how can you be recommending these to people with multiple sclerosis when the vaccine has never been tested in people with multiple sclerosis? So Jolo, how do you deal with that question? I shouldn't take it because it's never been tested in people with MS. How do we know it's safe?
So as part of all of the big trials, they've been tested in hundreds of thousands of patients, and in that population, there would have been patients with most autoimmune conditions. So MS patients would have been included. They weren't a subset, so the studies weren't powered to test for that. But also, as Barts-MS, we've probably given the vaccine to hundreds now of MS patients with illness. So as time goes on, more and more patients are having this vaccine. Admittedly, we don't know the antibody response for all of these patients just yet, but we're gaining that. But it's not causing harm. Patients are not having the vaccine and having relapses or having adverse events. So, and there isn't any data to say there's people who have a sore arm, but patients with MS aren't having that to any higher extent than people without MS. Yeah.
So the other thing is, Klaus, maybe you can talk to this. We had Professor Ron Milo from Israel talk to us, and they've also vaccinated quite a large number of their MS patients, haven't they?
That's right. Yes. I mean, they obviously don't have so many overall, but I think he was speaking still in the 3-figure bracket of numbers, but I think he was trying to talk about perhaps 1 or 2 cases where they had sort of mild side effects, but there was really nothing to hang your hat on. I think there's so far the same as for the overall experience with the vaccine. It's been very reassuring. And I mean, increasingly, we really need to look into how, I mean, maybe that comes up as a separate question. I don't want to take over here, Gavin, but I think it's so much about how we get that message across and how we get really make it clear this is safe and that everybody gets engaged with this. And when I read the figures that Joella circulated between us, was it yesterday or so, or this morning even 20 or 30% uptake only in the BAME population. It's it's really concerning, I think.
So Andrea, the question goes to you, Andrea. Yeah. So you can't hide your accent.
I can't. Yay. Proud Jamaican.
So you've had the vaccine?
I have. I've had the vaccine, and as I was saying earlier, I just had like minor. I had this ache at the injection site, but that resolved like within 24 hours, and I didn't need to take anything else. I've also had heard reports of other friends or people like in similar communities that have had the vaccine already, and they didn't report anything untoward as well. But I think what we should be mindful of is the whole engagement issue. I think that's where we need to go, because the term vaccine hesitancy tends to have this negative connotation associated with it. And the minute you say someone is hesitant, then this barrier, this wall automatically goes up. And I think for people in my community, there are genuine concerns, and I think we need to meet them where they're at and address the concerns that they have. And I think a multimodal approach is necessary. So getting the information out there, yes, it's safe, yes, it's effective. I mean, we now have evidence in the UK of lots of people taking up the vaccine, and the adverse events are very mild. So we need to get that information out there as well, but engage. I think that's the way to go.
So when you wrote your vaccine paper, the actual Public Health England or the Department of Health vaccine group, they didn't like the term vaccine hesitancy either, did they? Do you remember?
Sorry, Prof. Can you repeat the question? Yeah.
Do you remember when you wrote your paper on vaccinations in MS using vaccines? That they didn't like.
I lost you all.
Oh, he's gone.
He's gone.
Yeah, I think the word that I've heard, and I actually use far more than hesitancy now, is confidence, right? So what you need to build is vaccine confidence, and that I think is a positive term. And you can have no confidence because you are not informed or so, but your hesitancy kind of implies, as Andrea said, immediately kind of like a blame and a kind of a culture, and that's obviously not what we should facilitate in any way, because if people have those concerns, they are usually, they have a backdrop.
Yeah, and that's where we come in as healthcare professionals, isn't it? Because I think we can then engage, just listen to their concerns, like surely conversations I've had. You're right, it's around confidence, around the safety and effectiveness of the vaccine. And then you can draw on the clinical trials data, and you can draw now on real world evidence data from what we're gathering, and push that message through. I think one of the things that happened earlier on in the pandemic last year was that there was so much misinformation. Lots of stuff was going on WhatsApp, and I have families dotted across the globe, and it was coming at me from the US and from the Caribbean, like lots of stuff, and you can't trace back where this information is coming from. And I think if you think about it, the counter narrative around this misinformation didn't really come from trusted sources until the latter part of last year. And I think moving forward and moving ahead, as soon as, if we're, God forbid, we enter another situation like this, but we need to have the counter narrative earlier on in the process to negate some of the misinformation.
Which is one of the reasons why we're having this discussion. David, one of the questions that keeps coming up is people are confused about which vaccine to take up if they get given options. You know, do you think there's a difference in terms of the effectiveness between the licensed vaccines that are available?
Well, based on the Scottish data that we saw yesterday, they're both very, very effective. I mean, at the moment, we've got an option of 2, and I guess we're expecting more to come along. But, you know, in terms of efficacy, both look good. So, you know, they have advantages and disadvantages. You know, obviously the Zeneca one is good because it's very easy to distribute, whereas the Pfizer one has created more of a problem. But my advice obviously would be, whatever you're offered, take it. You know, it's all about protecting yourself and protecting other people as well. So that's why I think it's good to, you know, take what you can while you can.
I think when it comes to preventing severe infections or hospital admissions, they look like they all bat in a similar efficacy zone.
Yeah.
The question about do they prevent infection is a different story, but I think the populations that were studied in these trials were very different. I think
that's the thing, isn't it? You know, when you think, oh, one does this and one does that, we've got to remember that the virus is changing all the time, and some it's a bit more effective than others. So it's difficult to do anything without kind of that head-to-head real life data.
So David, you're a basic scientist. One of the biggest worries is the mRNA is going to go into our DNA and change it. And these people are really concerned that the RNA vaccines, which are a relatively new technology in terms of vaccines, but not in terms of biology, are going to get into our DNA and change our germline. But how do you respond to that?
Well, it's the wrong direction, really. I mean, generally what happens is you have DNA goes to RNA, goes to protein, goes to vaccine response. So really what we're doing is we're putting in RNA, which then just makes protein, and therefore you make a response. And so it doesn't really integrate into the DNA, and therefore it's certainly not going to, you know, change you, and it certainly won't get into, it won't get into your sperm and your eggs, which would be, you know, required for it to pass down the generation. So I think it's really an unfounded concern that really isn't based on any kind of real science, you know, good scientific evidence. I think.
I think that's where the fertility questions came up, and it isn't based on anything. But then people get worried based on nothing, and then it's sort of like Chinese whispers. It sort of escalates very quickly, but there is no concerns with fertility with these vaccines.
Actually, I'm talking about fertility. Jola, there's been some new potential guidelines coming out, or recommendations around pregnancy with the vaccines as well.
Yeah, so prior to, like at the beginning, we weren't giving the vaccine to women that were pregnant or breastfeeding, but because now it's more deemed that actually it is safe, because some women, and it's been trialed and there is evidence that they're now going to start giving it to these patient groups as well. So, you know, as more evidence is coming out, the guidelines are changing. So something that wasn't in the guidance last week is changing. And me, Klaus and David know that the guidance often needs updating. I feel like it's 20 times a day because it changes so much. So it's keeping on top of things. And for those patients or the watchers out there, if you did say no to the vaccine at some point and you now think, oh, actually, I do want to have the vaccine, contact your healthcare professional and book it in. No one's going to say, oh, you missed your chance.
Okay.
You know, like.
I mean, that's good advice. If you've turned down a vaccine, get contacting and ask for another slot. So there's a big worry around, and there was many questions on this. Is that the vaccine will trigger people with MS to have a relapse? Have you been responding to patients' queries like that in terms of, do you think the vaccine would trigger a relapse or not?
Thanks, Prof. Definitely not. So based on the evidence we have at the moment, there is no strong evidence suggesting a link between vaccinations and the exacerbations of the disease of multiple sclerosis. So there is only one little concern, which is the live attenuated yellow fever vaccine, which is live vaccine. And then it was tested first like 6 or 7 years ago in a very small group of patients. And apparently there was a small risk of MS exacerbation after getting the yellow fever vaccine. But then more recently, we got the results from a bigger study from Sweden that clearly showed that there was no increased risk of getting a relapse from a clinical or radiological point of view after getting the yellow fever vaccine. So, and also, so based on that, the answer is no. And also, the majority of vaccines that are now available, the COVID-19 vaccines that are now available, are inactivated vaccines, or at least they don't, inactivated vaccines or mRNA vaccines or viral vector vaccines, which do not contain a live form of a virus and will not therefore increase any risk of an immunological response that could lead to a relapse in MS.
So David, from a basic science point of view, do you think there's any scientific logic around these vaccines triggering relapses?
It's hard to think what they're, first of all, we don't really know what triggers a relapse, but I think, the question is there is no evidence to suggest that this happens. And, I'm guessing you guys haven't seen an avalanche of people running to your doors. And I think, we heard from Professor Milo in Israel, where he estimated about a third of the country's MS population had been vaccinated already. Yeah. So, I think the reality is it's not happening. So, I can't really, I could sit there and try and construct something, but it's just kind of, it's a non-event.
So I worked out on Twitter yesterday. Somebody asked me the question on Twitter, and I said that there's 100,000 MS patients in the United Kingdom, and the relapse rate is between 0.2 and 0.4, maybe even higher than that, which means there are like 20 to 40,000 relapses a year in this country, because there have been 6 relapses reported MHRA in people with MS who've had the vaccine have had a relapse. And so, those kind of figures are low, and I think it's just coincidence, to be honest. Yes. I would not worry about it. What do you say, Klaus?
No, I think it's important. Yeah, I can completely underline that. And I would say there's obviously been that concern about these 2 or 3 cases that were initially reported with the AstraZeneca trial, where the hold, etc. But it turned out, one of them was a case where there were previous lesions seen on the scan. So this was essentially an under or not recognized case of MS. I think there's only one case kind of left that was perhaps really a transverse myelitis, as we find it in as a first manifestation of MS or as in NMO. But it's very likely a chance observation, because this is among over 12,000 patients, right? And I would just it reminded me of the situation with GBS, so Guillain-Barré syndrome, which is it's kind of the peripheral correlate, as it were, almost of multiple sclerosis. Much rarer disease, but still one that can lead to significant weakness and sensory problems. And there was certainly the sense last year in spring and summer that there's kind of an increase in cases. There were several reports building up, and then there was a kind of a study was done based on the Hsct, the hospital episode statistics data, looking at that, matched that up, and it was quite clear that the numbers were actually lower than previously observed. So it was a non-event, as I think David used that term earlier on. So we need to be observant, need to look after at the data, look at the individual cases, but then also believe in the data.
And I guess we have the UK experiment now. I don't know how many people have been vaccinated with the AstraZeneca vaccine, but it's got to be a lot of millions
So it's over 10 million. I'm sure it's
over 10 million. And
Yes.
we're not, again, hearing this avalanche of cases. So again, kind of reassuring us that, probably those events were a chance event.
And also the MHRA has already put out the first report, and the transverse, that was, I think, after 2 million cases were people who were vaccinated, and on the MHRA report, there was not transverse myelitis. There was a handful of cases of Bell's palsy, which seems to be more common on the Pfizer vaccine, not the AstraZeneca vaccine. But again, Bell's palsy is a very common condition, and because you vaccinated like almost a third of the UK population already who are eligible, it's possibly, I just want to reiterate, it's possibly a chance finding. And Bell's palsy, the majority of people recovers anyway. It's a monophasic illness. So I would like to, reiterate, this is unlikely to be a real signal.
Yes. I think it can be, just to say, I think those, if anybody's sort of listening, that can be a serious, significant and long-term condition. In some cases, it just doesn't recover. And it is, it's aesthetically and sometimes functionally a real problem. But I think the bottom line is these are chance events and they happen with or without vaccination. That's the important thing.
And I think it's important to put it into the risk benefit as well, isn't it? I think we saw in the news the disproportionate number of people in the BAME community in terms of the hospitalization. So it's important to think about, there is a small risk from anything, but it's also the what you gain by doing that.
Jola, coming back to you as a co-author of the guidelines, one of the things is people are saying, well, I'm going to my neurologist and saying, I'm going to my GP and I'm saying I'm vulnerable, so I've got MS. And they're saying, well, you're not vulnerable, you're not eligible for the vaccine right now, go home and wait. What should that individual do?
So depending where you are, and remember last week, the coding for being vulnerable changed. So it now takes into account the different models. So it takes into account your ethnicity, your BMI, your diabetic status, as well as your long-term conditions such as MS. So it may be a case that patients that were not clinically vulnerable before are now clinically vulnerable in AstraShield, and that changes your status. A lot of that was done to increase the number of patients eligible for vaccine. So it is go speak to your GP and explain why you think you're vulnerable. If it's your GP, if it's your neurologist. For centres in the UK having access to vaccine, it depends on your local centre. So we were very lucky at Barts-MS. We're able to offer the vaccine through our centre. Not all centres have been in that place. So it does depend on your local centre what they're able to offer. But most MS patients would be deemed some sort of on the scale of the vulnerability. And will be coming up to being in the top 4 or 6 of the category. So we'll be coming up for being vaccinated very soon.
Okay. So class steroid therapies, if somebody's had a course of steroids for relapse for something, should they be waiting to have their vaccine or not?
I think we're probably going to come back to that debate later on when we're talking about deep B-cell depleters, because it's always, I think, the slightly higher risk for the individual at that time to contract the infection, and perhaps a mildly sort of reduced vaccine response, or waiting longer and have a better response, but then maybe the infection has already happened. So I would generally say that shouldn't impact on the timeline of vaccination very much.
You would, but Klaus, you wouldn't want someone suffering a relapse, so that's the reason you've given them steroid, to add the vaccine on top of it. So you would want them to actually, let's wait till your relapse symptoms are finished.
Exactly. Well, I'm not sure about that, simply because relapse is, the recovery from relapses can just take months and months. And in the situation, I would really only be guided by the steroids and perhaps give it, a short delay, but not very long. I certainly wouldn't wait until that's all over.
Yes. So I think what you're highlighting, Klaus, is this need to have immunity as soon as possible to protect yourself, versus the delaying getting the vaccine to when your immune system is more responsive. And I think this is the balancing act we've got to play with all our therapies. is the timings around, which we might as well address this question straight away. Because there's a lot of these questions are around, I'm on Ocrevus, I'm on ocrelizumab, when should I have my vaccine? So what's the advice, Klaus?
I'll pass on to David first.
No. That's one good thing. I don't have to give advice.
That's right.
It's a very difficult one because it also depends on what we've had is the vaccine interval going from 4 weeks to 12 weeks to 4 weeks to 12 weeks to 4 weeks, and so that also plays in terms of your dosing characteristics in terms of maintaining your regular cycles. So you actually, because obviously the important thing is that you have your MS under control, and if you're younger and don't have the comorbidities, then you generally do very well if you do catch COVID. So the important thing is to keep your MS in control. Now, obviously, you can speak biologically about what you think may be the best case scenario for today. So we can say, well, do we think B cells are important and antibodies are important for vaccines, or do we think T cells are important? And the answer is it's probably both. But we don't have the information, and until people actually start taking who are treated, and then we actually see what the response is, and then we also know what that response means, because you could have a very, very high response, but you only need a tiny one to actually be protected. And we know that with many of the vaccines that people get as part of their MS treatment, and flu vaccines, etc., that you only need a small amount to actually be protected. And in terms of the T cell stuff, we don't know how much that is affected, but I would imagine it's probably not affected, but we just don't know. But I think we just have to get people treated and then monitor, and then we may have to adjust our ideas down the line, I think.
I think the easy situation, relatively easy situation, is when you have somebody who's been 3 months after their infusion and then onwards, as it were. That's why I said at one point we will have this discussion for no longer than 8 weeks, okay? Because by that time, kind of we have covered essentially these first 2 or 3 months after the infusions, and then everybody's just ready to go or has already gone to have their vaccine. There will obviously, we're discussing obviously about uptake, and so that will be a recurrent theme. But as we go along, we'll also gain more confidence and more information about how the response relates to protection from disease, right? What levels you really need, etc. So clearly, I mean, the one benefit I think of the B cell therapies is that you are able to push them a little bit down. If you are just coming up to your 6-month infusion and your vaccine comes up at the same time, well, the best I think would be then go for the vaccine first, delay the infusion for a couple of months, right? So you have the first and the second jab, and then move on from there. Anything earlier than that, so between 0 and 3 months, I'd say it's just kind of guesstimates, right? I think the advice in the SMPCs for the medical product characteristics is at least 4 weeks, and I think this is just as reasonable as most advice that's currently being given.
So Jolo, this is not going to. I mean, we're having this debate, and it's great that it's around COVID-19 vaccines, but we've been giving flu vaccines seasonally every year, and we haven't ever questioned when to give them in people on anti-CD20 therapies. No. So you think this is going to affect the flu vaccine season as well? It's going to.
Well, to be honest, did the NHS not report there's not been one case of flu admitted to hospital this year, because everyone's washing their hands for a change. So carry on washing your hands. You don't need the flu vaccine. But going forward, I think we'll learn more about vaccine response and timing. But remember, it's not harmful to get the vaccine at any time point related to any of the DMT therapies. It's just trying to maximize a response. But there will be a response at whatever time point, and that's all we're trying to do. So it's, remember, if you can't time it right, just go and have a vaccine and have your DMT.
I think in the flu season, you have got a window. They start vaccinating, I think, in September or October.
Yeah, so we don't have a choice.
And it runs until about end of January, February, and so you've got a window. I'm looking at Andrea there. She's had the COVID vaccine. Andrea, did you have the flu vaccine this year, as a matter of interest?
No, because I went home before. So I was home and then got back when everything just fell apart. So I just got the COVID vaccine.
That's your way of protecting yourself.
I go to the Caribbean. I spend a lot of time in the winter in the Caribbean.
So, I mean, one of the issues is that healthcare professionals should lead by example. You know, and I've been pretty bad with popping in for my flu vaccine every year. And I think from now on, if we're going to have to walk the talk, we're going to have to go and have our flu vaccine and say, look, we're having it. You know,
and the NHS is not saying this, but other private companies are saying, if you want to work for us, you need to have the COVID vaccine. I don't want people to be forced into it. I want, like, people should have a conscious choice to decide to want it. Otherwise, I feel like if you've been forced to do something, you're more likely to feel that every side effect is a side effect because of the vaccine. But I don't think the NHS will force it. But the Royal London site uptake was 50-something% among staff members. So a lot's being done to, reiterate the concerns. So MS population isn't unique in having concerns. I think it's across the population.
Yeah. Did you see that study that was published in the BMJ, this last week's BMJ? It was a trust in Leicester, and they looked at all the healthcare professionals. And what was quite amazing is that the Black, Asian, and ethnic minority group, which was a big chunk, had a much lower uptake of the COVID-19 in the hospital NHS staff relative to the Caucasian white British population. So this issue around not wanting to or having concerns about the vaccine has got nothing to do necessarily with education, because we're talking about and the doctors were the worst, which I thought was quite remarkable. So this is a big issue we have to address. It's
and that's why you need engagement. And I think, first of all, if you just come to me and if I have concerns, like genuine concerns, and you come to me and say, well, take the vaccine because it's beneficial, like, it's not going to make me take it. You have to find out what the concern is and hit that concern right on the head. And I suppose we need to start the conversations with all people, right? Because, as I said, we started late with the counter narratives, and so we're going to have to work a lot harder. We're playing catch up with the counter narratives, really.
And we think we're bad. I mean, I don't want to highlight it, but when you looked at that international study that the WHO and Wellcome Trust funded, France got a lot of skepticism around the vaccine.
Yes,
particularly as an outlier, it sticks out like a sore thumb. France, for whatever reason, the French just seem to be very nervous about vaccines in general.
But it's not only about.
Sorry. Yeah.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say that it's not only about confidence on the vaccines. It's also about complacency. There's much people who believe that there is a low risk of COVID-19, and therefore they deem vaccination as not necessary. So we also need to address this, not only the lack of confidence in the vaccine.
Yeah. They call it the 3 C's. You have complacency, you have confidence, and there's another one, isn't it? Convenience. And we know it's convenient here, right? It's very accessible. So you have to target.
So the other one is certain population groups. Now, the primary progressive people think everything is addressing the DMT issue and everything like this. So, Klaus, what would you say to people with primary progressive disease? The same. Is there any difference? The message to the person?
I mean, we've long sort of passed. We're long past that point as a team, and I think as a community increasingly to think of MS as a separate disease when it's primary progressive in its kind of phenotype, the way people present versus relapsing disease, because they all have an inflammatory component in their disease course. That plays a role, and so there's no fundamental difference between them. I would not expect. I mean, we know that people can have worse symptoms in, for example, when they have a urinary tract infection or other sort of type of infections, and that their spasticity, if they've got lower limb stiffness, gets worse, etc., transient. And I wouldn't rule out that that is similar for a day or two, maybe, because you obviously develop a response, and in some that can be only in their arm where they got the injection. In some it can be that they just develop a little bit of a temperature, and that can in itself, as we know, be a problem for people with MS who are often very temperature sensitive, and symptoms can get worse. But that is a very transient phenomenon. This is only as long as you develop the immune response that is intended, and then that passes, and you're protected, and you've got essentially your previous level back after that. Yes, and then there's obviously some who are on disease-modifying treatment now, and the same applies to them, really. I mean, we have currently the only licensed is obviously ocrelizumab B-cell depletion. We've talked about that. Just to throw something in, I was just wondering or challenged the panel to come up with analogies, right? For when people are concerned about taking something on or changing their behavior or doing something that they haven't done before. I mean, I'm just thinking of a seat belt, right? I mean, there was a long discussion about seat belts when they came into, so that, you know, there are always kind of the colibri rare cases when you may not benefit from a seat belt, but it's a minute proportion, when in you know, in 99.9 plus cases it's actually better to have a seat belt. So I don't know whether anybody else has a similar picture, perhaps.
Yep.
I just wanted to make one point, Klaus. When people looked at the kind of risks from COVID-19, it was important to realize that obviously it was the comorbidities that were affecting everybody, but
yes,
the disability was kind of one of the MS related ones.
Yeah.
So it's obviously important for the more disabled people to, you know, try and protect themselves as well.
Yes, yes. I mean, if anything, that's obviously supporting further that you should go for a vaccine. And I mean, we've seen when did that come out? A couple of days ago or 3 days ago, to show the shocking number of people with disabilities that were affected.
60%, Klaus, that's the figure. 59.5% of people who've died from COVID-19 have been classified as being disabled in some way. Now, that is a shocking real stain on the British conscience. We should never allow that to happen. And and I think that's the message which should go out. You know, one of the risk factors for severe COVID or dying from COVID-19 in the MS population, this emerges from the French, the Swedish, is disability, being disabled. So even more reason to be vaccinated if you are got some disability, to be honest with you.
I would also like to highlight again the fact that we are going to have some patients with PPMS on ocrelizumab. And I really want to highlight again that the fact that people on ocrelizumab, people with PPMS or relapsed MS, will still respond to the vaccine. We know from the Velocity study that up to 80% of patients on ocrelizumab responded to the flu vaccine. You know, it is a remarkable percentage, considering that sometimes, depending on the season and the strain that is circulating, the flu vaccine efficacy can be as low as 60% or even less. So people with MS on ocrelizumab do respond to vaccines.
Just to say that, so just to say, just to put in context, that's where the evidence base is. That's why we always talk about this 3-month window, because the Velocity study took patients and vaccinated them 12 weeks, 3 months after their course of ocrelizumab. So that's kind of why we talk about the 3 month after, because of the Velocity study, because we've got that database. But that doesn't mean to say somebody who has the vaccine after 1 month or 2 months won't respond either. We don't know that.
No, definitely. This is keeping in mind the 3-month window.
Sorry, Dave.
And maybe I've been taking a sneaky preview of the ACTRIMS that is going to happen later on this week, and the abstracts have gone online, and there's some information suggesting that people with cladribine will give responses to vaccines. You know, so there's not any information out there, but obviously some people have been in studies where they've had the flu vaccine. So the abstracts are out, I guess,
I've got the data on I've got the data on my computer. When's the embargo break? I can show you the slides. Anyway, as Klaus and you predicted, people on cladribine respond to the vaccine. Okay, and the reason being is the immune system is not almost fully functional in cladribine treated patients. So, the bottom line is cladribine is not a potent depleter. It's a moderate depleter. It leaves the innate, the T cell, and the naive B cell compartment relatively intact. So it's not surprising people on cladribine have responded to the vaccine. And this is even people who are in the depletion phase of the cycle. So I think that's very good news in terms of cladribine. My biggest complaint is particularly from the National MS Society. They just lump cladribine with alemtuzumab, and alemtuzumab and cladribine are very different drugs.
Yes, I mean, this is a little bit like the lumping together of oral medication with infusions, or that's. I think it just doesn't really. It's not the right sort of categories. I agree.
Yeah. Sure. Anyway, so what else, David? Have you picked up on the what's going to else come out?
Oh, there's a few. There's quite a few things, but I mean, they're for different. We can have another webinar for that one.
Okay, so now let's get back to the talks at hand. Jola, fingolimod and obviously saponimod now, and in some parts of the world, or ozanimod, and there will be trial patients still on ponesimod. So that class of therapy, the S1P modulators. What's your current guidelines for those?
Is if you're on therapy already, go and have the vaccine, carry on taking your therapy, don't stop the treatment, just carry on. If you haven't started saponimod and you're being worked up in the UK, that it's only currently being commissioned, so you might be in that pre-phase, have the vaccine now, so by the time all of your pre-tests are done, you're ready to go with your treatment. But it's have the vaccine, carry on your treatment, and then wait and see. And if you're a patient at Barts-MS, take part in our antibody study, so we can work out what to do next year, because that's what's going to come. It's next year's. We need to have booster doses. It's going to be the evidence we gain this year that will help that.
So, Klaus, your advice around the 4-week window. What would you recommend at the moment?
Well, I think whatever you can get, really. I think this is the advice that I would give at the moment. I think there's a clear benefit that we now can give the mRNA vaccine kind of with the prescribed gap. Having said that, I think the data show that even with a single dose, the immunity is still rising after that time of the second prescribed jab. So I would not be too prescriptive. I would listen to what the JCVI or the government in that case really says, and follow that. Get your arm to the vaccine as soon as you can.
So, Jola, the other questions that keep coming up is the timing of, let's say, you start to start on a DMT like ocrelizumab, and you've had your first and your second dose now. How long should you wait for the booster dose to kick in before you have your immunosuppression?
I would wait a week or two, but you can carry on straight away. You do not need to wait months and months. It's carry on. Yeah. We're advising currently 4-week gap, but actually, if it happened a bit earlier because of the way that's the diaries for, we wouldn't be worried.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I think
from the Pfizer, vaccine, it's evident that a maximum response is within 7 days. So it does happen quick, and that's the beauty of a booster, isn't it?
Yeah. So, Saul, in your vaccine paper, the recommendation from the Green Book is 14 days, isn't it?
But then that's for live vaccines, but for inactivated vaccines, the recommendation is 2 weeks.
2 weeks. So there is no hard and fast rules. About 2 weeks, but again, Jola's advice has to fit in with the logistics of the unit. So after your booster dose, from 2 weeks on, you should start your therapy, and you don't want to wait too long because you don't want your MS to become active when you want to be on a treatment.
Yes.
Because already you're going to have to delay it. Even if it's a 4-week gap between the vaccines, that means it's 6 weeks from the start before you can go on to DMT. So, what are the other questions? So that was the S1P modulators. Do you have any concerns about, Klaus, any of the others? Natalizumab, the
Well,
orals?
natalizumab, I think there was an early concern that the virus might be neurotropic, and I think it is but very mildly so. I think I'm not only aware of 1 or 2 cases, I think, of encephalitis with COVID. I mean, that were pathologically confirmed. Maybe there's more now, but that sort of the blocking out of lymphocytes from the CNS would potentially be harmful there. I don't think that any of that is borne out in the data, and so I would just keep continue as you go along. In fact, I think some of our patients have had their vaccine now on the same day as they get their infusion on the ward. So I think with natalizumab there's no issues. Injectables, I think, is quite clear. There's potentially even a slight beneficial effect of interferons, but it's not sufficient. So you still need to have your vaccine that is specific. What other treatments have we not mentioned? Tecfidera, teriflunomide, Aubagio. I think same advice applies here as for fingolimod, that you just insert it somewhere in the day because it's a daily medication, and you take it alongside, just as you would with your flu vaccine or any other vaccine. Really, you wouldn't sort of interrupt that. I think although the risk is obviously not that great, I think there's no positive evidence to do that, right? I mean, risk compared to fingolimod, say, where there's the rebound risk. Yes, I think maybe. Has anybody talked about HSCT?
No, there's a question here. There's one of the questions that have come through. Somebody has had HSCT, and they're worried about the vaccine triggering a relapse. So what's your advice, Klaus, to an HSCT patient?
But I think there's usually, I mean, it depends a little bit on the schedule that's been used and the whether it's an ablative or non-ablative scheme, and there are guidelines from the Hematological Society when vaccines should be given. I think it's usually anywhere between 3 months, 4 months after the course, with a minimum cell count as well. But maybe Saul has more on that. Have you had that situation? So first, just to say, I think the risk of relapse is just as invalid as, or not supported by data as it is with the other scenarios that we discussed earlier.
So in terms of relapses, I totally agree with Klaus. And then in terms of vaccine efficacy, it seems that vaccinating within 6 months after HSCT can lead to a lower response to the vaccine. As long as you already reconstitute your immune system, there shouldn't be any problem.
Yeah. Actually, a lot of the bone marrow transplant units, particularly the ones that use the more ablative therapies, they revaccinate all their patients in year 2 against all the childhood vaccines, and there's no issue there. So I think that this is a curveball. This is just another vaccine, So I think anybody who's had HSCT can go ahead and have the vaccine. Obviously, once their immune systems are reconstituted to a degree, they should have the vaccine, so no problem there.
I think one of the concerns, Gavin, sorry for interjecting, but that consistently comes up, I think, in the discussions, and maybe Andrea and Joella want to speak to that as well, but it's kind of the speed of the development. That is one of the big concerns, that why, we have no vaccine for so many conditions, right? And here comes COVID comes along, and suddenly, within less than a year, we've got 3 more right coming up. And how is it possible to develop a vaccine that is so effective in such a short time, frame? Okay. Yes.
So David is implying David's implying money, but actually it shows what working together does.
Collaboration.
Yeah, everyone, the whole scientific community, the whole medical community was working towards one goal. So maybe next year we should choose a new goal and everyone should work for a cure for MS.
So within this 1 year, we've had more publications in this year than throughout the whole of history for multiple sclerosis.
Wow.
In 1 year.
Wow.
In 1 year, in 11 months.
It's amazing. But I think people also got to understand that the 3 vaccines that came out first, okay, the 2 RNA vaccines and these vaccines had been designed and were waiting in on a shelf.
Yeah.
For example, the AstraZeneca vaccine had been designed for MERS, for the coronavirus that caused the Middle Eastern respiratory syndrome. And all they did was, when the sequence came out, they just chopped out the MERS, put the SARS sequence in, and the vaccine was made and designed within 7 days. So there was technology ready to run. That's another thing that was sped up, you know.
Yeah.
And that's where confidence comes in with the speed, because when you listen to people, that's exactly what they're saying. They're saying, actually, how comes you have this thing so quickly? Yes, there's collaboration, but, you know, great minds working together. But yes, I agree, there was already something there that they could use. But it raises the question around openness and transparency, and just to be open about what we know, what we don't know, and how things were developed, because that's one of the key concerns.
I mean, to be fair, the governments gave money, and David is absolutely right. So when these vaccines needed to be developed, they pre-ordered them and gave large. I mean, I think the British government gave AstraZeneca something like £2 billion up front, and they helped invest in production plants. So all those things that would normally happen in series happened in parallel. So I think it wasn't sped up; it just happened all in parallel.
Yes.
The same with the licensing. So the licensing documentation, usually you wait till everything's finished, you wrap it all up in a bow, and then you send it to the MHRA. This time it was sent in bits. As things got ready, they were sent it so they could review it as things were happening.
Yes. And I think we should also not miss out. Sorry, did I interrupt somebody?
I was going to say, and the other thing that is it very evident, because of this massive, collaborative effort, a lot of things actually are duplicated, which actually is good, because it means when you have some data, you get 5 or 6 replications very, very quickly, and therefore you have the confidence.
Yes.
And that's also part of the scientific process.
Yes.
So that's really made us more confident about what we're actually seeing.
Right,
and if there's something unusual, we see it very quickly.
Yes, I think confirmation was incredibly important very early on, absolutely. And I think when we're talking about collaboration and all the parallel efforts, I think we should also really highlight and in a way really thank all the volunteers, because I think that was also a huge effort. And I must say that it's quite remarkable how kind of tens of thousands of people joined these trials, in a very short time frame. And, and this is what actually brought the results. This is why, I mean, on their backs, as it were, on their arms and shoulders, quite literally, we're standing now.
I volunteered. They didn't want me.
Oh, David.
So, Joel, another question comes up is, in people that do get, these tend to be people with MS who are more disabled, that do get intermittent symptoms when they get a temperature and they're worsening. Should they be taking prophylactic paracetamol or ibuprofen or non-steroidal to prevent that?
You can do, and especially if you're coming up for the second dose. If you've had the first dose and I actually had an achy arm, I had a temperature, it's likely on the booster dose that you're going to get the same symptoms, if not a bit more severe. And I'm not talking massively severe. So yeah, you might want to take a prophylactic paracetamol to just, if it's temperature, or if it's an achy arm, take an ibuprofen, if that's appropriate for you. And you can normally take these things.
I think people are worried about it blunting the immune response to the vaccine.
It won't affect the vaccine response at all. It will just make you feel a bit better.
Okay. So Andrea, question now, because the next round of vaccines is probably going to be what they call live viral challenge, because the new viruses that are mutating, the mutants, there's no way we're going to be able to do these kinds of studies anymore. So what they're going to do is get young volunteers, people like Saul's age, okay?
Thank you.
They're going to put them in a category 3 research unit, like our flu vaccine research unit. They're going to vaccinate half of them and then give them a live viral challenge. How are you going to get your community to volunteer for those studies? Because I think that may be a good way of trying to get more encouragement, is asking them to volunteer for the vaccine studies.
I don't have the answer to that, because I don't fall in that young category. Unfortunately, I may look young, but yeah, I'm way past that. But I don't know is the answer.
Well, what happens? They normally pay you quite a lot of money, and people
Exactly.
say yes,
I think
yes,
money.
yes.
Yeah, I think money
Yeah,
helps. That's what I was about to say. Money helps.
I think with our communities, we need to break down the barriers around accessing research, and I think there's a lot of work that probably is going to need to go into it, you know, because even if you look at the profile of people from ethnic minorities within the trials themselves, they're quite low. But I know that to get people into trials, it's quite hard. And probably there needs to be some work around how to facilitate BME people to come forward for research as well and to explain that process. But don't forget that we've been hurt through the research process as well. So I think there has to be a lot of healing and a lot of engagement. There's no way around it. We're gonna have to come alongside and support people a little bit more.
Yeah. Otherwise, we're going to have more deaths. I mean, and that's one of the worrying thing is we're going to have more deaths. And,
yes.
Unless we get on top of things. David, you had something you wanted to say then, David?
No, I was just looking to say, you know, one of the things was, you know, people saying, you know, we haven't got the historical evidence about any of the vaccines, and I was saying, well, how long is going to be long enough? You know, we've had a year and you know, 15 million people in this country. Well, I was thinking about the RNA vaccine, and people are scared of that, and I thought, well, actually, how much RNA is in a cell? And so basically, the RNA you get is enough for 3,000 cells, and we're made up of 30 trillion cells. So we have tons of RNA now. So it's not something to be frightened of.
Yes,
okay. Yeah.
I think this is really important because it also addresses the point of fertility, right? I think there's been a lot of concern about fertility, and that is also, I mean, biologically not really possible. I think this is what needs to be, I think, made clear and reassured about as well. And otherwise, I think we need to send probably Martin Griffiths more on national TV to make his case, because it does it so well. The National Clinical Director for Violence Reduction, who works at Barts Health, he's been on Clive Myrie's documentary.
Yes.
So Clive Myrie's documentary has been very touching.
Yes.
Okay, and if there's no if you want a reason to have a vaccine, just watch Clive Myrie's documentary, because it shows you the impact at a personal and a family level this disease can have when it's severe and people are dying. It's really, you know, very tragic. And one of my colleagues in the United States, you may know Gary Cutter, there revised the history of the polio vaccine rollout and learn the lessons from polio vaccine and what a transformation it had. And I think there was a talk we had in our neuroscience Thursday morning meeting from the success story of the polio vaccine rollout in India and how they managed to eliminate polio virus in India. And I think the message there was that the people going around and talking about it and doing the vaccines were actually based in the community. They were from the community. They found polio virus champions, they call. What were their names, John? Is that a name for those community workers?
Yeah, I can't remember, but it is important. And I think that's the advantage having volunteers in the vaccine centers has been, because it's part of the community that you see there. So you're seeing people at the vaccine center, advising, asking, answering questions, etc. So if anyone wants to help your community get vaccinated, go and volunteer, go and speak to people, encourage people to ask questions and get vaccinated. And just a point that Klaus had made about, getting vaccine, you have the benefit yourself of being vaccinated, because hopefully you won't catch COVID, but you do also to your family and the people you live with. So so your carers can also get vaccinated now as well. So if you're caring for a patient with MS, as a unpaid carer, you can also get vaccinated. So go and get the vaccine for yourself as well as your loved ones. So
I assume I can say that all of us on this live stream have been vaccinated. Is that correct?
Yeah.
Every one of us has had the vaccine. Okay. I mean, I got Pfizer simply because that was the one available at the time. Do we all have Pfizer, or did anybody have AstraZeneca?
I had Pfizer.
Yeah,
David?
I think this was all the earlier rollout, right?
Yeah.
Saul?
Yeah, I got Pfizer as well.
Right. Yeah.
Just to say to you that
But then-
Saul got his vaccine not in the UK. He's gone back to Bogota in Colombia, and he got his in Colombia. So
yeah, but then
but I presume any of us would have taken any of the vaccines. It wasn't.
Oh, yes.
Yes,
Absolutely.
I would have taken whatever they would have jabbed me with. So.
Yes.
I mean, I want to say that from a fundamental perspective, there's not much difference between the AstraZeneca vaccine in terms of the science and the RNA ones. Because at the end of the day, the RNA vaccines are they're using the same mechanism the virus does to produce protein. So it's they're very similar in conceptually the two types of vaccines.
Yes.
Okay, we've run out of time. We've got another minute or two. Does anybody want to? Andrea, wrap up. Just want to comment.
I just want to say, I know the focus here is on vaccination, which is very important, but I also want to say, you always talk about prehabilitation, right? So don't forget about keeping active as well, because people with MS are at a higher risk of developing secondary complications associated with inactivity. And a lot of people are home working as well. So don't sit for too long, get up, and we've been sitting for an hour, I normally say to patients within every half an hour, get up, stand up, do a stretch, or every time an advert comes on the TV, stand up. So don't forget those principles as well.
Jola, you want to say something to sum up, Jola?
Yeah, no, remember, having the vaccine isn't harmful. We're just trying to maximize the response when we talk about the timing. But on Andrea's point, if you've been shielding and you haven't left your house since last March or April or whenever it is, and your vaccine is the first time you're going out, you might not want to wear the high heels if you're female or male. You might want to dress appropriately and make sure that you don't fall over, etc. You might not want to walk halfway across London. So just do it all safely and sensibly.
Okay, Saul?
I think everything has been said. I just want to say and highlight the fact that vaccines work. So just go and get your COVID-19 vaccine for yourself, your family, and your friends.
Yeah.
David?
Well, I just want to thank you all for listening, and just to say that obviously if you have any questions, please, obviously feel free to come and visit us on the Barts blog at msres-res.org. And then just ask us a question, because obviously you still may have some. Maybe we'll come back again because it's quite enjoyable, isn't it?
It is.
Klaus?
Yeah, I enjoyed it as well. I hope that people who are listening are not only those that kind of, they sort of agree with us anyway. And that's the important thing, that it perhaps triggers thinking about it again. And if there are concerns, just email us or contact us. You'll find us all on Google.
And I just like to say, I often get asked questions about what I think the greatest or the best innovation in medicine has been. And first, second, and third are vaccines, to be honest with you. You may want to put antibiotics up there and antipsychotics, but eliminating smallpox, measles, mumps, rubella, polio, these are the great discoveries of all time, and COVID-19 is going to be up there as well. From a scientific perspective, this is an incredible story, and we should celebrate it, because it's the end of the pandemic is the vaccine. That's what will end the pandemic. So please go out there, have your vaccine, and we know it's safe, we know it's effective, and those are the messages we get out. It's safe and effective. All right, guys, thanks very much. I know some of you got other meetings to go to, so this has been recorded, so it's going to be left on so people can watch it asynchronously. And if there's a need, we can do another one.
And people shouldn't forget hands, face, space still apply.
Okay. All right, take care, guys. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.